Hello and welcome to Global Perspectives. I'm David Dumke here with co-host Katie Coronado. Today we welcome Washington insider and Middle East expert Lara Friedman, who is the president of the Foundation for Middle East Peace. Thank you for joining us, Lara.
Thank you for having me.
Laura, what motivated you to start in this field, and if you can just give us some background on you?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me again. I am someone who has devoted an extraordinarily long part of my life to working on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I'll be honest, that wasn't my plan. I didn't set out to become an expert on this or to focus my life on it. I set out to be a regional expert working on the Middle East in general. And it's just almost by happenstance, which I think is how a lot of us sort of stumble upon our passions. You follow a path that leads you in a direction of things that you find interesting, where you feel like you can do some good. And along the way, you find something where you feel like, all right, I need to stop here for a while. I feel like I can make a contribution. And in this case, for me, this is an issue where I had done work professionally and based on my own personal background as someone who was raised to care about Israel and to care about, the Jewish people. This was an issue that it all sort of coalesced around this issue, and I said, okay, I need to stop here and work on this for a while.
And can you touch a little bit on how you were raised?
Sure. I mean, in some ways, I'm really a common example of the average American, right? So my family, we didn't talk about Israel all the time, but there was a baseline, strong sense of Zionism, support for Israel, the need for Israel to exist, the desire for Israel to be safe and secure, and a concern for Israel as a nation in a tough neighborhood facing, sort of an ongoing threat. That was just the baseline. It wasn't until I started working professionally and actually was posted in my first post in the Foreign Service. That was the first time I ever went to Israel. I was posted to Jerusalem. And there was a period of trying to reconcile what I found on the ground with what I had been taught. And what I found on the ground really didn't match what I had been taught about Israel at all. And it kind of shattered my understanding and in some ways challenged a great deal of my identity, to the extent that support for Israel is part of my identity. And in the process of building that back up, I think I came out much more strongly committed to Israel, but also much more strongly committed to standing up and trying to challenge the things that I thought Israel was doing that were wrong and that were bad for Israel and bad, that contradicted the values that I was taught are part of caring about Israel.
When you started in this field full time, when you left the State Department, it was an era where there was a lot more optimism on the peace process working. Flash forward to today, when it arguably has never looked bleaker. What keeps you going, and is there a peace process right now?
It's a really good question. I almost don't know how to answer it in a sense that it's a question that doesn't, I think, make sense to anyone who's working on issues about which they are passionate, about which they are committed. It isn't, I don't think it's really about thinking that, how do I say this? If your commitment to an issue is based on your belief that it can be resolved quickly, that success is imminent, then it isn't really commitment to the issue, right? It's commitment to a short-term success. Hope is not a strategy, right? People say, don't feel hopeless. Things are hopeless now, you have to hold on to hope. The antidote to hopelessness, as activists will tell you, is engagement. The antidote to hopelessness is activism. This for me, I'm not an activist fundamentally. I'm a subject matter expert. I believe that facts matter, and I believe that so long as facts matter, I need to do everything I can to be engaged and make sure that we hold the world accountable to facts. And I can't do that alone, but I can do my part.
So what do the facts tell you about the scale of optimism or pessimism on this particular conflict right now?
Look, one of the things that's frustrating for me when I talk to people these days is I will be accused of being a pessimist, which is sort of hilarious in a way, because a pessimist implies that you are someone who's given up and you're expecting the worst. And I'm not a pessimist. I'm a realist. I'm a pragmatist. Here are the facts. If you can find a way to look at these facts and find a way forward, then does that make you an optimist, or does that make you someone who is engaged and active and hopeful? And if you look at the facts and you say there's only terrible outcomes, does that make you a pessimist or does it make you a realist? I mean, I don't even know how to frame that. I am not someone who is by nature hopeless, or I mean, certainly not someone by nature who's hoping for the worst. I look at the facts as they are today, and I don't see a way forward in the short term that takes us back to a two-state solution or back to negotiations right now, absent some sort of change, some sort of accountability from the outside, some sort of increased engagement. Does that mean you give up, or does that mean you say, all right, we're going to stop talking about that ultimate goal that we were trying to achieve, and we're going to say we need to focus on what is achievable now and double down. And then maybe we can get back to something that takes us to an outcome. But it's sort of like, I think about people like in the civil rights era. They said, well, there's no likelihood in the short term that you're going to have, you know, a wholesale change in laws. But you give up fighting in the immediate term for, you know, on the bus or whatever. No, you fight these fights incrementally. And it's really depressing because 25 years ago, it did seem like we had the possibility of resolution on the horizon. It's not there today.
I know that your cause is a peaceful one and you have hope, like you mentioned. How do you make sure that both sides perceive you as being fair and as doing the right thing or proposing the right solution for both?
It's a great question. I mean, the starting point is you can't help how people perceive you. So I could say 1 + 1 = 2, and one side says, no, you're on their side, and the other says, no, you're on their side. There's simply no way to help how people perceive you. For me, I am not in the business of suggesting solutions. I'm not telling people how they should resolve their conflict. At this point, this is about saying, whether you think it's good or bad, this is what's happening. At least let's agree on what the facts are and move forward. You know, you can have 100 opinions, you only get one set of facts because the facts are what they are. And in this moment in time, that's an arguable statement that I just made. People will say, no, there are no facts, there's only opinion. In terms of both sides, when you get to an agreement, if we ever get to an agreement, it will be about the perception of the people themselves. You can't tell people this is good for you if they believe it's not. And years ago, someone that we both know, Nabil Fahmy, who was the the Egyptian ambassador to the U.S. and whose father was a part of the Camp David treaty with Israel, and he explained that the reason the treaty between Israel and the Egypt succeeded, despite the fact that there was a disparity in power between Egypt and Israel when it was negotiated, is that it was a treaty that was based not on a balance of power, but on a balance of interests. So regardless of who held the upper hand, both sides walked away saying, I am better off with this treaty. This treaty serves my interests as much as it serves theirs, and it's my interest to keep it. If we can get to that someday, I don't think it's about me trying to explain to anyone it's in their interest. People have to see it as their interest.
What would it take when you look at the Israelis and Palestinians right now, and you know the leadership quite well, you follow the politics every day. A lot of the facts and issues have gone so far to the Israeli side right now that there are those on the Palestinian side that said, why should we negotiate with them now? And on the Israeli side, there are those who say, we're getting essentially what we want, why should we negotiate? So in this kind of situation, you're talking about Egypt and Israel, there was a balance of interest. Is there a possibility of a balance of interest in that scenario? In that reality, I guess I should say.
I mean, the current reality, and you frame it quite accurately, there is no balance of interest. This is basically power politics. It's one side saying we have the power to impose on the other the outcome that we want, and they can take it or leave it. We can negotiate on the margins, but this is basically it, take it or leave it. And I think there are people who believe that that is the way to Israeli-Palestinian peace. You know, some sort of ultimate defeat of the Palestinian people, let them realize they're utterly defeated, and then we move forward with a different construct as a defeated people living in a world where they realize they're never going to have what they want. I am a student of history. As a student of history, I would argue that there is no instance where people defeated and humiliated have sort of quietly gone into the sunset and said, sure, that's fine, we'll go forward. You know, even if one generation is okay, the next generation is not. And this is how you get, you know, wars after war, generation. In the current context, it is hard to imagine outside of some paradigm shifting change, which imposes accountability on Israel, which imposes consequence on the leaderships of both parties, it is difficult to see why either party would come back to negotiations. And if they did, it's difficult to imagine what they could produce, assuming that we're coming into negotiations saying the negotiations start from status quo. Because the status quo has moved so far beyond the status quo that allows for a two-state solution. I mean, where do you go with negotiations?
So right now, what does all this mean for the people on each side?
Look, for the people on the ground, it means different things. I mean, if you follow the Israeli, the narrative inside Israel, and we in 2019 have had 2 elections, so we can see a lot about the narrative inside Israel. And what you see is that nobody cares about the Palestinians. It is not an issue of interest. People's lives are going fine. They're worried about the economy. They're worried about all sorts of domestic, what they see as domestic issues. Israel-Palestine is not on the agenda. People are not running as the ones who will make peace. To the extent that it's coming up in the last election, the April election in particular, you had one party, Mr. Gantz, which is the centrist party, almost like considered almost a left-wing party, but it's the center-right, essentially running on, I killed a lot of Palestinians in Gaza, elect me, I will keep you safe. It's just not an issue for Israelis because there is no consequence. It is, as a friend of mine once called it, it is a cost-free deluxe occupation, right? The world doesn't hold Israel accountable. You can continue building settlements. And frankly, there is no consequence to you for doing it. On the Palestinian side, if a generation ago there was a hope for peace, and there were people who were saying, hold on, we'll get peace through negotiations. If you go back to the early aughts, or even when President Abbas was elected, right? He was elected on a platform of, I will negotiate peace with Israel. I will negotiate a better life for you. There's no credibility now to talking about negotiations. I worry about the possibility of the appeal of violence. I worry about that very much. I'm in some ways surprised we haven't had more. And part of it is because the Palestinians continue to cooperate with Israel on security. I don't know how long that can last. When the Palestinian people largely see the Palestinian Authority, their government, as a subcontractor of the occupation for Israel, how long can it last that people will tolerate being policed on Israel's behalf by the PA?
Let me ask you a question on that kind of follows up on that. You're talking about the Palestinian leadership and how the Palestinian people view it, which leads to the question of legitimacy.
Right.
So at this point, there hasn't been Palestinian elections in quite some time. Is the Palestinian Authority, does it have legitimacy with the Palestinian people, let alone with the Israelis?
It's a great question. You should ask a Palestinian. If you listen to Palestinians and read, there's a lot of criticism. There has been for a very long time. The problem there in some ways isn't the fact that there haven't been elections in a long time. It's that the Palestinian Authority is not seen as delivering on behalf of the Palestinian people. And any authority in any country, the legitimacy is based on what do you deliver to your constituents. And the PA cannot deliver to its constituents anything that Israel does not let it deliver, right? That's the situation. It's under occupation. It's not delivering revolution. It's not delivering a negotiated end to occupation. It's effectively, again, a subcontractor of the occupation. And that's not a recipe for legitimacy. The call now, we hear it a lot from the outside, is, you haven't had elections in so long, so you need to have elections, and that's problematic as well. This authority, the elections were a long time ago, but it can still at least claim the pretense of representing all Palestinians, West Bank, Gaza, and in East Jerusalem. If we go to elections now and Hamas doesn't want elections, so they won't be in Gaza, and Israel will never permit them in East Jerusalem, and maybe won't permit them in parts of Area C or all of Area C, which is the area of the West Bank under Israeli control, you end up with an elected authority which has legitimacy only for the Bantustans that Israel wants it to govern on its behalf. And that is a diminution of authority, not a solidification of authority. So I don't know what the way forward is. I've heard people talk about moving, Abbas is talking again about elections. Are we talking PA? Are we talking PLC, which, you rise to a supranational level? Is that a way around it? I don't know. But fundamentally, whatever you do, if the Palestinian leadership can't deliver something to its people, it doesn't matter how many elections you have, right? in the United States, does someone run for re-election based on a platform of, I've never delivered you anything, and I'm actually only making things, I'm overseeing your lives getting worse, re-elect me. It's not really a way to get legitimacy politically.
And what are you doing from here? I know that you have your organization and you follow this closely because it's your passion. What do you do from here?
So it is my passion in a way, but fundamentally I am a subject matter expert. So my organization, we're a foundation. We give small grants to people working on the ground in Israel and Palestine and the United States for the goal of, supporting rule of law, supporting civil society, pushing back on the efforts to delegitimize those who are working on human rights, that kind of thing. All of this is, it's small stuff, but it matters because this work is getting harder and harder to do. The space is, people talk about the closing space. It's not the closing space. It is people are closing the space actively on civil society. And then for me, my own work, Dave can talk about this. I see it now as almost my mission just to get the facts out there and to hold people accountable to facts. And I joke sometimes. I think sometimes when I do my research and do my publication, the same people who disagree with me the most are still happy because the facts I'm putting out there, I think they're bad news, they think they're good news.
Well, let me ask on the facts question, because it's been said both in politics and in international, domestic and international, that the facts don't matter at this point because we're dealing with narratives that people believe or don't believe by choice and by how they affiliate. Do the facts matter in the Middle East? And with Washington insiders who actually are working on Middle East policy, do they care about the facts?
I think the facts have to matter. I'm going to keep trying in my life to make them matter. I don't think this administration really cares about facts. I think this administration is, in general, pretty contemptuous of expertise. And on Israel-Palestine, their policy is pretty openly driven by ideology. And you should recognize that and respect it. They're very clear, right? They have a policy which is driven by a sense that Israel has a right to keep the land, it is God-given, and you can look back at all the comments by David Friedman, and it's quite open. And if you're coming at this from a religious, messianic, ideological perspective, none of the facts I give you matter anyway. Facts are things that you get around because you have an ideological goal, right? In terms of the broader appeal, do facts matter? I don't know. Does rule of law matter? I think it does. So if someone steals something from you, I think it's important to recognize that this is not a disputed glass. This is a glass that you stole from me, for example. I was accused, I spoke on a panel last spring at a university, and someone wrote an article about my panel and accused me of being, terribly anti-Israel and anti-Semitic because I talked about an Israeli policy, they said, of saying that Israel had been limiting the number of calories getting into Gaza. And they said it was a terribly anti-Israel, anti-Semitic comment. Do the facts matter? I was literally quoting one of Ariel Sharon's advisors on a policy that he talked about and that the Supreme Court validated when someone went to the court and asked them to force the IDF to issue, to open up. It was a FOIA, a Freedom of Information request. This was the policy. So me articulating the facts was framed as an anti-Semitic attack. Do facts matter? I hope so.
It also depends on where you're getting your facts, right? Your sources.
Right.
It does. But at the end of the day, I sometimes talk about Obama. Obama was accused of betraying Israel by abstaining from a UN Security Council resolution on Israel-Palestine. And the narrative that took root during the Obama era was that no US president had ever allowed an anti-Israel resolution to pass in the UN Security Council. And I thought to myself, that doesn't sound right. And so, I can say to someone, I think that's wrong, or I can do the research. And I did the research. And what I found was, no, every US president since 1967 until Obama had let many UN Security Council resolutions critical of Israel pass, either had abstained on them or voted yes. Obama was unique in allowing none until that last month. That was his uniqueness. And when he did allow it, it was not unprecedented. It was not only not unprecedented, he still had barred more than anybody in history. He was more pro-Israel at the UN than any president before him. Nobody cares, as far as I can tell. I published an article about it. Not just that, I published my data table. Don't believe me, check the data yourself. Does it matter? You know, the historical narrative, it's very convenient to say, oh, he was anti-Israel, look what he did at the UN. You know, if I have to get out my data and my charts, it's like I've already lost, because then I'm saying, well, let's check the data.
Let me ask you, you brought up Obama and kind of how he was perceived as being anti-Israel, which some would conclude is a reflection on the current Israeli government, or the Israeli government at the time, which is under Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has always been seen as closer to Republicans.
Yep.
Which raises a question here. Foreign policy in America theoretically should be a nonpartisan issue, and you've always worked for nonpartisan groups, just
Yep.
to be clear for the record. Is there a danger when you have an Israeli government who is seen as favoring one side of the American political ledger over the other? A danger for Israel in this case, or a danger for Americans who want to support Israel?
Look, I'm not sure how to qualify what counts as a danger. Having an Israeli prime minister come to Washington and speak in the U.S. Congress to speak against the policy of the sitting president of the United
Right.
States is a painful thing to watch for me as someone who cares about Israel. I think it's bad for Israel. I think it's bad for the Jews. I think it's bad for foreign policy. I think it's just, it's shocking. You know, Prime Minister Netanyahu essentially campaigned against Obama in 2 elections. It was shocking. And you know, to the extent that it's up to Israel to decide how it wants to run its own foreign policy, it appears at this point that the Israeli government, certainly under Mr. Netanyahu, has decided that it doesn't need Democrats, it doesn't need American Jews, it can deal with the evangelicals and the handful of Republicans, or a handful of Jews who are Republican, and that's all it needs, and the Democrats can either get in line or can get out of the room. You know, it's very painful. For me, as someone who was raised on the idea that the U.S. relationship with Israel, the beginning of it is grounded on shared values, right? Light unto the nation, progressive democratic values, tolerance, all of that. To have this sort of shift to we make common cause with the most illiberal actors in U.S. society, in parallel to Israel making common cause with the other most illiberal governments across the world, whether it's, you know, Orban or Bolsonaro, or, I mean, it's very painful to watch. I would argue that, you know, just from speaking as a Jew, my commitment to Israel stems from that. And I've written about this. Jews have not fared well generally in the world when the world is dominated by a might makes right approach, right? The post-World War II liberal world order, which was shaped in large part by the experience of the Holocaust and by Jewish jurists coming out of that, that world order was shaped to prevent there ever being a recurrence of a might makes right, roll the truck over a minority group, whether it's the Jews or anyone else. Never again meant never again to anyone, not just to us. And it seems to me like to some extent Israel has decided never again means never again to us. And if we're now on the side of the strong guys, we don't care about the rest. And I don't think that's good for Israel. I don't think it's good for the world. And it's something that I think anyone who cares about Israel should be very concerned about.
If you would kind of move away from Israel for a second and look at, you know, Washington has played a very influential role in this region, both on the Israeli-Palestinian question and on the broader region as well over the last several decades. What is Washington's policy to the region right now, and what is its role on the peace process? Can it be a constructive one,
Yeah.
and is it a constructive one?
Well, starting with the second part of your question first, because it's easier. I mean, this administration's policy on the peace process is very clear. It's not a peace process policy, it's a greater Israel policy. And one would do well to take them at their word when they say things like, we're taking Jerusalem off the table, right? You know, we now believe the U.S. as a matter of policy that if a country gains territory in a defensive war, it gets to keep it if it wants, right? Which is, you know, anathema to international law. Take them at their word. They're very clear. That's not about a peace process, and it's not about a two-state solution or a peace agreement. It's about ending the Oslo process, scorched earth, sow the ground with salt, and make sure that no one can ever return us to the hated path of pushing Israel to give up land. And they're well on their way. And it has been consistent, coherent, well-articulated, and enormously effective. So that's where we are today on Israel-Palestine. More broadly in the region, I mean, there are certain things that are very clear, which is how do we get the Arab world on board in taking the Palestinians out of the equation, right? We can focus on Iran. We can work on the Gulf-Israeli alliance against the hated Iran, which they've had some success at, right? This is interesting. There are some subterranean shifts there that have been going on for a long time. How do we manage the great power conflicts, Russia, Turkey, Syria? Bottom line is they don't have a coherent policy on Syria. They don't have a coherent policy on Yemen. The relationship with Saudi Arabia makes all these things difficult. I mean, they inherited from the Obama administration a fair amount of foreign policy chaos in the Middle East. And at this point, it seems like to the extent that they can harness that chaos in the interests of specific goals, like targeting Iran or taking the Palestinians off the table, they will. And beyond that, there's a certain amount of making it up as they go along, reactionist policy. If you see a more broad, coherent policy for the Middle East, I'd love to know what it is.
Lara, we've run out of time. I wanted to thank you for your perspective and definitely, want to keep following the subject and your research.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today, Lara, and thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again on another episode of Global Perspectives.